this. So, right now we have like a really, really boring app. It's just a form. Ideally, if we add something, so like do labs, we press submit. Ideally, it'd be nice if we could turn this into like our to-do list. So let's kind of go through how we might organize our React Redux application, the Redux plumbing, and what are like some best practices in organizing your code, and also nuances with Redux thunk. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start up my JSON server. So let's do, in here we have our source, CD, and then I'm going to JSON server our data.json, and then we have localhost 3000/task, and it is empty. Let me just double check that. Inside our source and then data. Yep, okay, it's empty. So typically, I would probably recommend starting from your like static React version to go ahead and make at a minimum some sort of components folder. You can have a components and a container. Usually the bigger your app, that's when you'll probably want to start making that divide. I've also seen some people do folders just based on like feature. So like maybe if you have like a restaurant app, like this is like all your components relating to making an order. This is all your components related to checking out. This is all your components related to like answering phone calls. That's very valid as well. But at least what I can start is I can say create a components folder, and then let me rename that. Call that lowercase c. And then I'll just drag in maybe like my task, and then I can make maybe like a containers folder, and I'll drag in my app, and I'll drag in my task list, and then now I have to resolve some conflict. So this is now going to be container/app, containers, and then inside my app, this is now going to be, form will also need to be in components. I can say my task list is going to be correct. My form is, I'm going to have to go up one and then to components, form, and then inside task list, this will be importing the task component, which will be components task. Let me just see if there are any errors. Cannot resolve containers app, and index up. Probably made a typo. Yep, I did. Okay, I keep making those same typos. There we go. Components task inside task list. It's probably that. Okay, there we go. So starting with, of course, yeah.
What's the difference between, you had component will unmount. What's the difference between that and component will receive props?
Component will receive props. So the components will receive props one is like a rarer use case. I believe it is if you want to derive something from the props, or you need to keep track of previous props. Let me just double check that. So components will receive props. So let's see, components will receive props. Ah, interesting.
So it's unsafe.
So components will receive props is a deprecated function, meaning the creators of React don't recommend you use it anymore.
Oh, I see.
When it was a valid piece of code, what it did was it does, let's see, using this lifecycle methods often leads to bugs and inconsistencies. Out of curiosity, what was it supposed to do? Let's see.
So do you recommend these data updates?
Let's see. Is invoked before a mounted component receives new props. If you need to update the state in response to prop chains, this is apparently the way you used to do it. But that's not the way we do it anymore.
Cool. Glad to know.
So the plumbing we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and like do, for setting up Redux, we can go ahead and do npm install -- save, and then let me make this bigger. -- save, and then we want to install Redux, and then also React Redux, and then Redux Thunk. Oh, I realized I did -- save with the space. Ugh, I wonder if that will affect it. We'll see. So package.json doesn't have anything yet. And now it has Redux, React Redux, and Redux Thunk. So the first part of setting up Redux would probably be to create the store. In order to create the store, what I would recommend doing is go ahead and create like a folder like called Redux, and then you can have like a file called like store.js. And then in order to create store, so we can say like const store is going to be equal to something, and that something is going to be create store. So create store is something we have to import create store from Redux. So create store takes in, at a minimum, a reducer. So a reducer, we can create a reducer in this file. I would recommend for your modified projects decoupling that out. And so I'm going to create a file specifically called like reducer.js. And then at a minimum, the world's simplest reducer takes in some state, some action, and returns a new state. So I could go ahead and say like const, I'm going to call this like reducer is equal to a function that takes in old state plus an action. And for the time being, I'm just going to return the old state. So this is going to be like the world's simplest reducer function. I'm going to export reducer as my default. So export default reducer, default reducer, which means inside my store, I could import reducer from, and then I need to find it is going to be reducer. And then that's what this is. And then in this file, my default export can be the store. So we've created the store. The store requires some state and some reducer. So this is the reducer. We haven't initialized the old state yet. I can just go ahead and say it's going to be just task, which is an array. So if it makes it a little bit easier, you can also say like let initial state is equal to like task, which is just an array of tasks. And then you could say set the old state, like the initial state of our reducer or our store will be this task of, which is an empty array. So once we have the store, once we have the reducer, we need to actually hook it up to React. And we do that with React Redux using provider and connect. Provider is how to hook it up like as a one-time thing, and the connect is for every time you want to map state to props or dispatch to props. So with provider, we can just kind of choose like a good entry point. We can say import, say provider from React Redux, and then wrap all this in the provider component, provider.
Does it make sense to put something like connect in there too, like in your index.js?
Probably not. In the index.js, if you're not using connect, you wouldn't need it.
Okay.
So provider does take in the store, and then store is going to be equal to whatever the store is. So we can import store from, and then we need to figure out it's in our Redux folder and then store. So we can check to see if there's just errors in our app. That's also a good way to check to see if your app is even up and running. So npm start, yes. I want to start it on 3001. So no errors, good sign. Console, we have in our app. I can just get rid of that. If we check like our Redux developer tools, we see that like it doesn't like sense the store because we never set up the instructions. So what I usually do just to see if my store is set up is I'll add in this one line of code after the reducer inside the store. So here, if I do this, this will set up my dev tools. And hopefully now what will happen is I will see the initial state is task. So like this is a good indication that your plumbing is set up correctly. Like we have a store, does it connect with my React app? And it does if you see that after your init, the state is task. States are equal.
Nice dev tools.
Yes.
They're super helpful.
So what we can do next is figure out how to start hooking up like state changes to our React application. So one of the things we could do is start building out statically without fetching yet. So for example, right now my task, ideally if I submit the form, that would be a good way to update this. So hitting submit might say like, oh, add a new task. So that tells me in my form component, if I want, and right now I've gone ahead and actually, in my app, my form doesn't take in any props. In my form, this doesn't have any props, so I can actually get rid of this, but it'd be nice if like we had a prop like called onChange that would allow us to update our tasks array. In other words, just create a new task. So this is a good indication for either needing map state to props or map dispatch to props. We, in this case, are actually going to need both. So the app is going to need to get our state. So that's the map state to props. So whatever's in here, right now it's empty, but if this wasn't empty, we would need it to appear at least in the task list. So this is a good, let's see if I can have a whiteboard. So one of the cool things about this is my first time like revisiting this application. So you guys get to see kind of like the brainstorming kind of process as well. Thinking about all the ways my app can change. So I know I have my form, and I also have my task list. So I know that my form can change state, and I know my task list needs to read from the state. So if some component has the ability to change state, that's a good indication that this is a map dispatch to props. If a component just needs to read state, but might not necessarily need to change state, this is an indicator that it's a map state to props. To props.
Could you say that one more time?
So in the brainstorming process, when you're trying to lay out what your app can do and all the ways your app can change, if you have a component that changes the state, that component needs to do things. So that component needs to like invoke some sort of process. So that's a good indicator that this component is going to need some sort of map dispatch props. Whereas task list doesn't have the ability to change the state, but it does need to read from it. It needs to know what is the state so to render all the individual tasks. So that's more of an indicator that this is going to need a map state props.
Because this one's rendering.
Right, so
changes.
This is just needing data from the state.
Whereas this one you're actually sending
You're
that's
changing
your
the
store.
state.
Yes.
Exactly.
Cool. Oh, that is good.
So we can work on the form one first. So the form one is based on the old code. We had this form. So on change, let's see, we don't need this. I'm going to say, let's see, don't need this anymore, but we do need this. So on submit of this form, there's this prop called on submit that doesn't exist. It'd be nice if on props.on submit was a function. So if props.on submit was a function, that means that function could dispatch an action that changes the store. So we go from essentially the form.
You took a good marker.
We go from the form, we go to some action creator, and then that will go to like the reducer. That will change the store, and then the store may or may not update the form, but that's typically the flow.
Was that store?
This is reducer,
Oh, reducer.
and this is store.
Okay.
In this case, since the form, it seems like the form doesn't need to read from the state, this last like arrow isn't super important. So we do want to update the store, but the store might not necessarily affect the form. But if we know this, we know that we want to have a map dispatch to props. We could say like const map dispatch to props. So map dispatch to props takes in the dispatch function object, and it returns an object that matches like some props to some like function object. So the prop we already have here is on submit. So form has a prop called on submit. And inside a map dispatch to props, you're mapping props to some function object always. So this is always a good start. So here's the prop, here's the function object. So it looks like this function should ideally take in the text to add. And how we have this text, right now we don't. So this is actually a good use case to have local state in React. So let's actually take a look at that. This is a unique case. So we have class form extends react.component. So I will need to import React. Oh, we already have that. And then this is a render, and then inside we'll return this.
This is where we're setting state, right? Because it's not a really important thing to extend.
Yep, a lot of the times what you'll see is even in a React Redux application, forms will have its own local state because control forms is still really, really easy to use.
And the reasoning behind that is because, like, until we submit, we still have to kind of keep track of what is being input into the form to submit to, and then once it's submit is when it would actually go to the store,
Yes.
right?
So we might say the initial state is going to be empty text. Let's go ahead and just make sure it's going to be this.props. Let's see if there's any errors. What we can do to see if this state is set up correctly is we can go back to our regular Redux developer tools, or not React developer tools, and check our form. Does our form have state? Yes, it does. And then on change of this, we could do a couple things. We could actually inline a function, or we could write it out here. So I can say like on change, we'll do given an event. We're going to say this.set. Oh, this needs to be an arrow function. This.set state. Set the state of text to be the event.target.value. And then we can see if this works. This.onChange. Back to here in our React application inside our form. As I am changing, we see that our text is changing. dispatch, let's go here. On submit, we could go ahead and wrap this in an anonymous function and say this.props.onSubmit, and then we pass it in the couple ways we could do this. Yeah, let's just pass it in the state. So this.state.text. And so we'll get the text here. So onSubmit being a function that takes an argument. This will be a function that takes an argument. And then we could dispatch. And then we could dispatch some type, whereas add new task. And we can say like the text is going to be whatever text is passed in here. What's up, Caroline?
What is the difference between that and prototypes? Are they like the same thing? Do they do the same thing?
Prototypes from like classes in Mod 3?
I think,
I think
yeah. I think
Oh, okay.
so.
So when we are writing classes like this, you can think of like this as an alternative syntax to prototype. So this is kind of like the new way to kind of think about it. If we didn't have the ES6 way, if we created like this function called form, if we wanted to create an instance method, we would say like form.prototype.onChange is all this. But this is just syntactically like way nicer.
Cool.
Under the hood, it's still using prototype. But from a developer point of view, we don't need to really like concern ourselves with that.
Cool.
So, and how comfortable are you guys with enhanced object literals? Like, do you get this syntax?
Yeah, because well, let me say it. Make sure I do understand that we're taking the oh man, I feel so dumb today. Not it's the argument, right?
Mhm.
And because it's named the same as the key, it just automatically, if you set it up that way, it'll just assign the key that argument.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So this map dispatch to props function doesn't actually connect to our form yet. If we use connect from React Redux, and then we don't have a map state to props yet, but if we pass this in, then we wrap this. This will connect it, assuming we actually import connect. So import connect from React Redux. So what we can actually do is in our Redux tools, we see that we have an init. As soon as I submit, we get a refresh.
Default?
Yeah, I need to prevent default. Let's see, event.prevent default. I think that's it. So test submit. Still getting that. Let's see.
Should it be,
Did we assign a value to the input?
well, it shouldn't be on the onChange, should it? It should be on the submit.
Right. So on the submit, I see. That's what you meant. Okay, you're correct. Let me.
That's an inline function though, so.
Yeah, that's okay. We can just make this a slightly messy inline function. Let me double check this. So event. So given the event, and then we do event.prevent default, then a semicolon, and then calling this.props.onSubmit. You would think this would work, unless I have this
Take out
syntactically.
the event in onChange? Or do you need that still, don't you?
Oh yeah, I would
Yeah.
still need that one. I think I missed a syntax or a curly brace. So if I submit here, there we go. So you guys are correct. I needed it here. This prevents the default. So what I can actually check to see is if I do a submit, this will get called, this will get called. Props.onSubmit is mapped to this function here, and what dispatch does is it will send this action to the store, to the reducer, but our reducer isn't set up to handle it. But we can check to see that like it's actually making its way to the reducer. So what we can do is in our reducer, I'm just going to say, let's go ahead and do a switch on the action.type. Then I can do, if the type is add new task, then I want to return, let's actually just, even though we only have one state, I still really like combine reducers because then I get to focus on just the key instead of the whole object. I'm gonna go ahead and import combine reducers from Redux. And let me make sure I'm spelling combine reducers right. So is it combine reducer or reducers? Combine reducers, okay? And then I can const, we'll call this root reducer is equal to combine reducers, and then I pass it in an object.
Is that standard to name it root reducer?
You don't have to, you can call it reducer. Let me remind myself how to use combine reducer.
Just a key and a value.
Just the key and the value. So do you return in your root reducer? Oh, you don't need to return it. You just pass it in an object that maps in the key. So the key is task. And I can say task reducer.
So the key is the state, the value is the reducer that it's using.
Exactly.
Okay.
So now, old state doesn't have to be initial state. I can say the initial state of the task itself is this empty array. Don't need this. So now task reducer isn't from the perspective of the entire store. It's just from the perspective of this key value pair. So what is the initial value of this key? It's just going to be empty array. So if add a new task, return a new array where you are spreading the old state. But you're also adding a new task where the text is, and this is where we can, actually I'm gonna comment this out for now because I want to go back to the app. So, task reducer not defined. Yeah, okay, I guess I have to go back here and then I will get rid of this for now because I know it's going to throw a syntax error. So I know if I hit submit, I can click on this to remind myself like what my action object looks like. So this action object, action.type is add new task. So action.text is going to be whatever we submitted. So if I do test submit, so action.text is going to be the test.
Oh.
So now, if I want to add a new task object, I can see the text is going to be equal to action.text.
Wait, where is that set up? That it knows what text is?
So if I type in some stuff here, new task, and I hit submit, the developer tools let you see all your actions dispatched.
Oh,
and
okay,
then
we set that up in the search bar, right?
Yep.
The text key.
If you actually click on like more information about the action, it'll say this is your action type. So action.type
Got it.
is what we're switching on, which means our action.text is going to be the actual like
Input.
payload that we sent over.
Yeah.
Can I put payload instead of text?
You absolutely could. We could, you can name it whatever your heart desires. So we can say payload is equal to text.
Oh, so you have to do that if you want to call it payload.
Right. Or if you want, you could have it payload here, payload,
Same thing.
and then payload here. Just to double check that. If I submit a new task, submit, we'll see that the action.type is add new task, action.payload is going to be the actual like thing we sent.
What's the industry standard?
It'll either be payload if payload is a more complicated object, or if you're sending something simple, you can just name it what it is.
Cool.
So payload is a nice like wrapper for like here's a bunch of data. So what we can do is in our reducer is action.payload, and then we can say like done is false. And then the default case is we always just want to return the old state. So if I new task, or let's say like do labs, submit. So as a result of this action, what has changed? This is the state now that this action is finished, but like what has changed was like task now has this additional index. We could say like, we could also say like go home, submit, and we can see that this is the difference. The state is just a summary of the store. So what we've done so far is the form has the ability to change state. We've implemented this. We haven't done the inverse where the task list has the ability to read from state. That's exactly why you don't see the task right there. You could do that really quickly. So inside our task list, we see that this.props.task, so just props.task is some array. Right now that array is coming from the parent component, which we don't really want. We could instead set up a map state to props. So the map state to props takes in not the dispatch, but a variable that represents the state in the store. And then we want to return an object that maps the props to the state in the store. So what we want is this component has a props named task. We want to map that to state.task because in the store, that's what the name of this key value pair is. So inside task list, task is going to be this, and then we need to connect it. So send it map state to props. And then if you don't have a map dispatch to props, you can just omit the second parameter. Then import connect from Redux. So now if I say do labs, we see do labs.
If you refresh it, will it still be there?
Let's see, it's not there. So kind of like vanilla React, the store state is refreshed on every new time there's an app. So there's a hard reset. That means the store is going to have a hard reset. Store right here, not right here, right here. So every time there's a hard reset for the app, the store will have a hard reset, which means the state will go back to its initial.
So in order to have that persist, we would need to put it in a database and then pull it out upon load of that page?
That's exactly it. And so we can really quickly take a look at what that's like. So I can say the ID is going to be, the ID of this task is going to be ID 1, and then the, what did I call it? I need to make sure it's consistent, the text. And then so in our data.json, the text is going to be do labs, and then done is a boolean that's say false. So now my JSON server will, do I need to reset the JSON server? I think I do. Let's kill that. Nope. Okay, there we go. So how does Thunk fall into all of this? So we could very well, at the beginning of our application, use component lifecycle methods. But since Redux allows us to decouple any sort of state management from our components, thumb kind of lets us do the same thing with fetching. So we can decouple our fetches from our components, which is a better practice. Now, we'll still need to use lifecycle methods. And let's say we could use, let's do this in just app, since app is already a class component. Oh, and we also don't need this. Sweet. Let's just make sure that still works. Do labs. Okay, our app is working great. So we can say component did mount, and we need some way to make a fetch call, but we just don't want to write the logic to do the fetching inside the component. What we can do is we can just refer to some prop or some function that is a prop. So we can say like this.props.fetching task. Fetching task would ideally be some function. So if we could have a prop called fetching task that fetches the task from server. Since we are trying to map this prop to a process, or because this prop is a function, this is going to be a map dispatch to props. So we want to map this prop to some function object that allows us to dispatch. We want to dispatch some action item, so like type, and then we can call this like fetching task. So fetching task doesn't take in any arguments. This doesn't need any arguments. What we can then do is just connect. We don't have a map state to props. Pass this in here, and then import connect from React Redux. Let's see if this works. So on load of the page, we should see fetching tasks be dispatched to our store. And then fetching task is not a function. Fetching task, not dispatch to props. This.props.fetching task. Let's see. Try to see if there's a typo I did. Fetching task is not a function, okay? It's here. Should be, oh, I need to return this. Okay, so it needs to return an object that maps this. That was it. Okay, nice. So on load of the application, immediately we see this action being dispatched. Nothing's happening, and then just a regression test. This is still working as expected. So now, since I have a couple different actions being dispatched, this is a good chance to go ahead and refactor so that you can have all of your actions in one place. Actions.js. Actions.js is going to be basically an alternative to me manually like writing out all these actions. So instead of writing the action, I can just refer to an action creator. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to write a bunch of action creators. So this first one will say constant, let's see, fetching task. It's going to return this directly. Then let me try export fetching task. Oh, I need to make this equal. So fetching task is going to be a function. I should be able to export that, and then in my app, I'm going to import this from, and then I need to go to, I'm in my container, so I need to go up one, and then to Redux, and then to actions.js. So now I just need to call this. Let me regression test, see if it works. actions must be plain objects. Ooh, I must have typed something incorrectly.
Have parentheses around that?
Do you have to import it?
I think you did already.
Oh, you should.
Yeah, so I thought I was fetching task, return? I thought it was an implied return.
Do you have to make types? Oh, I guess
That's weird. Okay, I'm not sure why the implied return did not work. Okay. But I can see that I'm still dispatching this, which is good. And then I'm going to go ahead and inside my form.
Do you need to have those curly braces around the return?
That's what I was thinking. So.
If you only do parentheses, it would work. That's why.
I think I know. Parentheses. I understand now. Yeah, Joseph's correct because when it started with the curly braces, it misunderstood that this was a function body. This should work. Yep. Okay. Wonderful. I'm going to create one for this one too. So this is add new task. And so in my action creator, I'm going to create a const add new task. It's going to take in some payload, which is our text, and then return this. So add new task. And let's inside the form import add new task from, and then we need to go up to Redux and then actions. So add new task, and we pass through the payload. Regression test, do labs. Okay, perfect. We were working on the thunk. So inside the actions, right now this fetching task is returning an action. What thunk will allow us to do is instead of returning an action object, we can return a function. So instead of saying, hey, we are fetching the task, we want to actually make a call to our database. And then once that's done, we can deploy a type like fetching task, or say like, oh, like the task has been fetched. So instead of returning a action, I'm going to attempt to return a function that lets me do the fetching. So fetch localhost 3000/task. This is a get fetch, so I can do that. Then response.json. And then when I get my task back, I could say dispatch. So I get dispatch as part of my thunk function. And then I can dispatch some other action creators like type. I can say fetched task with my task as the additional data. So the error I will get with this is that we need custom middleware. We can take a look at how to do that. So Redux thunk documentation. And we can say, how do I use this? So injecting extra arguments, we don't need that. What we do need is, actually I don't even think I need this one. I need the Redux developer tools documentation. This it?
I think so.
Wonderful. So inside our store, we currently have the Redux developer tools as a middleware. And so middleware is something that you can input in between when your actions are dispatched and before they get to the reducer. So if we want to import another middleware, so thunk from Redux thunk, one thing we could actually do is we can actually, if we get rid of this completely, and just say thunk,
that would still work.
It would work. So store.getState is not a function. Middleware, apply middleware maybe. I think I might need it. So if this is the middleware, store.getState is not a function. This is in our provider. Let me see Redux Thunk documentation. Let me zoom in on this one and say, okay, so we imported it here, Redux Thunk, and then default, why do I need this? Motivation, what is a thunk? Installation. Okay, so we need apply middleware from Redux. So I'm going to take this, and then we need to apply this middleware. Whoops, I clicked on the wrong thing, which is a function that says we're going to apply this. So now we actually don't see that error anymore, where it's like, oh, you require middleware. So now we actually have thunk in our application. We just don't have the dev tools. If we want the dev tools, it's like a whole slightly different process where we need to use something called compose. So we compose, compose. And what compose will do is it will go ahead and kind of like compose all your middlewares together, or like combine them into like one thing. So what this is saying is if you have your developer tools, then set this equal or set it into your compose enhancers. So compose enhancers, what we do next is we wrap this, so compose enhancers, we wrap this around our apply middleware. So compose enhancers, you can think of it as a function that takes care of our Redux developer tools. We are then applying this thunk middleware using this apply middleware function. We're taking that, we're also combining it with compose enhancers, which basically is just our developer tools. And we're saying all of this is going to be the middleware we send to our store.
Question.
Of course.
If there was like, let's say, a third piece of middleware that we wanted to add to our application, how would we do that?
A third piece of middleware, you would probably look into the apply middleware function. My gut would tell me that your apply middleware function has some way to apply multiple middleware. Apply middleware, ... middleware, let's see, apply middleware, logger, let's try multiple. Okay, so the feature of middleware is that it's composable. Multiple middlewares can be combined together. So how do we actually do that? To apply multiple, you use compose. So how do you use compose? Looks like we do very similarly to how we do it here. So you compose, apply middleware thunk, and then any other.
So just as an additional arguments, it ends up looking.
Looks like it.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you would put, it would be compose, and then inside the parentheses, apply middleware thunk, comma, and then you put the dev tool.
Yeah, you might even be able to alternatively use this syntax. Let me try this. So compose, and then apply middleware thunk, and then let me try this one.
Ooh, I hope it works.
I think it should.
That'd be pretty cool.
Expected reducer to be a function. I thought it was.
Is it the right window dev tool extension?
Windows
Is that the
dev tool extension. Let me check that actually. Oh, let me try this one. Oh yeah, I copy and pasted the wrong thing. Yep, so this works.
Cool.
So there are essentially two ways you could have created the store. The first one is with thunk only, it would be, there's a lot of typing I need to redo. Okay, so with thunk only, this is what it would look like. With the dev tools only, that's not it. Where is it? Okay. With just the dev tools, it'll look a lot like this. Okay, so reducer, and then this, and then this. Okay, so this is store with Thunk. This is store with the DevTools. If you want both, you just, instead of passing in one of these, you pass in the compose function, invoke it, and then pass in all the things you would have passed in one by one.
And then do we still need the compose enhancers up top?
Doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
Compose enhancers, I think, is just doing that under the hood, maybe some additional validation.
Okay. That looks cleaner to me.
A little bit easier to read with this way as well.
Sure.
Now, back to our action creators. So this is saying on mount of the app, we're going to call this action creator, which doesn't return an action, it returns a function that does this. And when it's done, it'll dispatch fetched task, fetched with an ED. If we double check that, we see that that is now true. We see fetched task. So you could create your own like separate action creator for this, like your own function, or you could just have it inline like this. So now inside our reducer, we can set up a case where if the case is fetched task, then I want the new state to be the action dot, what did I name it? Action dot task. Action dot task. So now on load of the page, we fetch and we say this is the new state. And then we
Wow.
see that task list, really the order in this is we dispatch the action, which is fetch task. That goes to the reducer. The reducer changes the state, and then the state changes the task list.
So are the types optional? Action types? Because it's just to find if there's an error. So easier, right?
Well, the action type is important because inside your reducer, you need to switch off of the action type to understand how your state changes.
Okay. I'm just trying to see where the action type is. Like, you know how the part where it would be like they name a const, they name it like, I should write it here. They do const fetch alt data, and then you make it equals to a string fetch alt data.
Oh yeah, you could do that. So you could have
That's optional, huh? 'Cause
that is optional. Probably a clean way to do it is maybe you have another file called maybe action types.js.
I've got a career coach meeting.
Cool. This is basically the gist of it. So const will say like add new task is equal to add new task, and const fetch task is equal to fetch task.
Is that also an industry standard?
Usually the consts are more industry standard.
Just so it can't be overwritten, that's why you would do it that way.
Can't be overwritten, and you're less likely to have typos because most text editors will have autocomplete for variables, and
Right.
also if the variable doesn't exist, you'll get an error.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
So we are exporting both of these, which means in here we can import, add new task, and also fetch task from action types. And so now we can just refer to fetch task, refer to add new task. And then inside our reducer where we need to refer to them, we can say
Change them all.
add new task and then fetch task. So this is the best practice. We can regression test, make sure it works exactly the same. So go here. We haven't done the post yet, so if I add a new task here, so like go home, it will render optimistically. Oh, auto.save is not a function. Maybe we can build that out. Yeah, we can do that. So looks like it works, like no errors. That's a good thing. What we can do is inside our form, on submit, we're currently invoking, or we're currently creating this, we're calling this new task action creator, which will only add the task to our state, doesn't actually do anything with the database. We could create a new action creator theoretically. Let's do that. Say const adding new task. Let's say this is our text, and then this will return a function. Let's just copy all this. So we could fetch to this URL, make this be a post request, headers, going to be an object, and then content type, application/JSON, and then, that's all I'll have for now. And then body is going to be JSON.stringify, and then we're going to add in the text. And then this is going to be text or this, and then I can say done is equal to false. So what I actually get back is
You gotta put a comma after the post.
oh, I forgot this. And I need a body, a comma where? Just double checking myself.
Right.
Yeah, it was just the post, I think.
Cool.
Just like a quote, not a comma.
And then, so what we get back is the task, and then we could actually say, we can say add new task. Add new task, and then the payload is just going to be our task. So, should be right. Let me double check that. So this is our task object with key value pairs ID, text, and done. And then in our action, we're sending that whole object as the payload. And then in reducer, it'll be action dot payload dot text. Okay, let's see how that works. Unexpected token inside actions.js. Let's see. Oh, what is wrong with my dot then?
Oh yeah, different color.
Yeah.
Okay, return dispatch. And
Oh,
then
you're missing a parentheses, yeah? After this on line 21 at the end. You need a
21.
third one.
Perfect.
Ooh, seems like it changed colors.
Okay.
Done
So
that so many times.
so we have one task. If I say go home, this will autosave is not a function. Oh, this dot autosave did update. Oh, I know what I did wrong. Inside my task. Yeah, this is from all the previous stuff we did.
Oh yeah.
Guess you don't need that.
That's okay. We'll ignore this file. Okay, go home. Go home. Oh, let's see what we did wrong. So, fetch task, add new task has an action of go home. Oh, okay. So I guess,
It's just action.payload, not action.text. Since we changed the name of it.
would look like it. So action.payload. That might actually just be it. Let's double check that. So go home, submit. Now we have go home.
Nice.
You might have added it twice here. Oh, it doesn't actually go through. Let's see why not. What is wrong with my fetch? Okay. HTTP post content time. Do I need accept?
What does that do?
So content type is
Or the accept, because I know like sometimes half the time I don't put it on there, half the time I do.
hey. So content type is like the request you're sending, what type of data it is.
Yeah.
Accept is the inverse, which is what type of data you expect the server to send back.
Got it. Okay.
So
I'll put it
with JSON server, I was under the impression that you don't actually need the accept,
I usually don't put it.
but
we can try.
let's see. Let me see what else we have. So JSON stringified text done. And also just try this. Then we get the task. We send that.
Dispatch to add new
Add task, add new task. Let's try that. So go home, submit. It's still not showing it. So let me try this. If I just fetch like this inside the browser, don't need this. Let me
I
just
love that.
console dot log, and then this is some stuff. Oh, syntax error.
No, you don't need that extra parentheses.
Okay, some stuff
Oh, it works.
works here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Which isn't. That works.
So we console.logged it. So I think something is wrong with the adding
Dispatch function.
the dispatch function. Let's try that. So go here. Instead of console.logging, let me dispatch that I want to dispatch add new task with the payload. And now the payload is, to my knowledge,
Was it text? Because one of them is not payload and text instead.
Would be task.text.
that is the question now.
For the add new task, was it payload?
Well, actually, before, that's very odd. So before, we were actually getting this to run optimistically in here. It just wasn't actually posting. So that tells me like this part was off. Try one more time.
But that worked on console.
So some stuff,
No, the some stuff was.
Go
she
home.
Put it there. That's why.
go home. So it is not posting. Oh, wait a minute. I never
And adding new
imported.
text.
So
Oh.
adding new tasks, I never actually exported it, which means inside my form, I was never actually using this dispatched thing.
Rough.
So I don't need the payload here. I don't need, or do I need the payload? I might actually need the payload. Let me double check. So
You do.
in
You
my,
still need something.
I need the text. And then, okay, let's try that. That was where I went wrong. So let's refresh this. This is do labs, some stuff. Then let's also go home. We see it.
Oh.
Let's see. Nice. So we're getting it here, and then I have a mismatch. So objects are not valid as React children. So I am doing something wrong
Is it because
here.
maybe you named like down? We named it task instead of payload. One of them was payload. One of them was
Mhm.
task. So like in the const add new task, is it text instead of payload?
I think it might actually be task.text is what I need. Okay, go home. Sleep. So sleep.
Okay.
Sleep.
Hey!
There you go.
We didn't do anything together.
Yes. So that's React Redux in a nutshell. This is basically
That is really awesome.
doing
That
it
was-
from
You did
scratch.
so well.
That
I'm
was very
that you
helpful.
had it, so I really now I feel much more confident.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
please post this video?
I will.
My gosh, it was so good.